Thank you everyone for joining us. I'm Rhea Kelly, Executive Editor for Campus Technology, and I'm here today to lead a conversation between three panelists who will be providing their perspective around the future of higher education, the learner, and the workforce. At the conclusion of our discussion, we'll take questions from the audience, so please type your questions in the chat and we'll get to those in due time. So to start, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Mark Lombardi, President of Maryville University, Will Zemp, Global Lead and Director of Education to Workforce at Amazon Web Services, and Dr. Andrea Marcinkus, Senior Academic Strategist at Pearson Online Learning Services. Panelists, I'd love for you to briefly share a little bit about your current responsibilities. And let's start with you, Dr. Lombardi.
Well, thank you, Ray, and thanks for everybody for joining us. Well, I'm president of Maryville University. I'm in my 15th year. I guess that kind of means they're stuck with me. And managing a university during waves of a pandemic is something that I don't wish on my worst enemy.
And Will, how about you?
Good. I'm the Global Lead and Director for Educational Workforce Initiative at Amazon Web Services. What we do is kind of three parts. Number one, we build a cloud workforce, a next generation workforce globally in about 40 countries, working with both public sector and commercial. And then the second thing we do is we innovate with governments and employers to place that workforce where it can be most productive. And then use that influence to get those learner stories and those employer stories up to influence best practices.
And Andrea.
Hi, everyone. I'm an academic strategist with Pearson Online Learning Services. I partner with institutions, our partner institutions, and help them launch and improve and strategize around online programs and other opportunities. Before joining Pearson, I was in higher ed for the prior 15 years, including holding positions as Dean and Director of Student Retention.
Thanks so much. So Dr. Lombardi, your reputation precedes you as Disruptor-in-Chief at Maryville, and you've shared a lot about how university leaders need to be brave and challenge the status quo in order to lead higher ed into the future. Could you elaborate on what that means to you?
Sure. And look, we all know that higher ed is at a crossroads and probably a reckoning. And we could have a whole other panel about why that is. That's a separate topic. What that reckoning means is higher ed needs innovation, it needs risk-taking, it needs to operate more like a startup and less like 100, 200, 300-year-old university. That means you've got to change the culture. And being brave and leading that effort means you have to seed innovation. It means you have to reward it. You have to protect it, whether it's faculty, staff, students, whatever. It also means you have to break down the walls of certain value systems that, frankly, have stifled innovation, like seniority is one of them. Seniority and innovation do not go hand in glove. They often operate against each other. You also have to avoid this constant striving for consensus. You're never going to have consensus around innovation, risk-taking, and challenging and doing things differently. In fact, risk-takers and innovators, by definition, go against the grain. That means consensus is not the goal here. Consensus, in fact, is an inhibitor. So you have to be brave enough to identify the cultural traits of the institution that are inhibiting these kinds of innovative things. And then you have to unleash that energy, and it's there. It's on every campus. It's in every place. Unleash that innovative energy, support it, resource it, and let it take shape. That's where you can really fundamentally change the core of an institution and change the delivery systems, the platforms, and all the other things we'll probably be talking about at some point today. And that's where you can get real innovation. But that's how you disrupt, and that's how you challenge, and that's the only way you can do it. You can't do it through the existing value systems and the existing processes.
It sounds like fighting words for a lot of higher ed people I know. So as a follow-up question, can you describe what will the University of the Future need to offer learners so that they have the skills they need for the jobs they want?
Well, first of all, the university of the future, I would argue the university today, because the pandemic accelerated us. It's not 2021, it's 2025 on the digital calendar, and we've got to be there right away. But essentially what we need learners, students, to be able to access content, information, and skill-based education and training on multiple platforms in multiple forms of content, not just a 8 or a 12 or 16-week course, but certificates, boot camps, all these different things, because one size does not fit all. We believed it did before in the 20th century, but actually we were deluding ourselves. It never did. What we've got to have is all this great content that faculty have shaped and designed, and being able to put it out on multiple platforms simultaneously so that students, the consumers, can consume this content in a variety of ways, mobile, flexible, from a cell phone, an iPad, and various devices. So we've got to deliver all this great information and skill-based training that we have, but we've got to do it on multiple platforms simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about that learner perspective, Andrea, I understand that Pearson has done research on learner trends. Could you share some of the things that you're seeing?
Sure, absolutely. And I'm going to echo a little bit about what Dr. Lombardi said as well. But we're really starting to see some really measurable attitudes towards higher education as a whole shifting. There's this greater focus on short and stackable credentials. And learners are really starting to rethink the value of a traditional degree and pathways to obtain education, as well, non-traditional and traditional degrees alike. So at the same time, they're really also seeking immersive, facilitated, and applied learning. So things like boot camps or high touch experiences, and those can be hybrid, in-person, or online, with a lot of personalization and a lot of feedback. So online platforms that have experiential and social collaboration tools. So we did a alternative credential and emerging fields survey recently. And one of the things that we found is that people are agreeing to or are neutral to the statement that alternative credentials will replace college degrees. We're seeing more people agree to that than we have ever in the past. Statements that are also more favorable to things like stackable certificates or digital badging are receiving positive percentages nearing 60%. And our global learner survey also confirmed shifting attitudes sort of away from traditional degree programs. And all of these things are because students are really expecting this anytime, anywhere, any size learning opportunities. And there's a few universal trends that are driving this. The first one is like do-it-yourself everything. So other industries, like we've seen in healthcare and IT, have really been transformed because consumers are no longer dependent on traditional intermediaries. And the same applies to institutions of learning. So in our global learner survey, we saw that 41% of those employed around the world are finding free information and training on the internet and self-teaching. The second trend is immediate gratification. So things like Netflix and YouTube are having people access information at the drop of a hat. And it's also manifested itself in courseware, right? So students are looking to YouTube for a tutorial, more information, or finding supplementary information rather than seeking help in traditional ways. The third trend is global mobility, and I don't think we need to spend too much time talking about that. It was really driven forward by the pandemic and really proved the fact that we can be anywhere and do our jobs and learn what we need to learn. And so you do see this also in higher ed as the majority of this was driven online, and the majority of learning was driven online during that time period. And finally, the fourth trend, which I think we all really want to talk about here this afternoon, is constant reinvention. So this notion of a 40-year-old career is dead, right? So it's estimated that most people are going to have about 12 different jobs between the ages of 18 and 48. And very few are working in fields that they majored in. And this tech disruption means that people need to constantly be learning and reinventing themselves in order to stay relevant and remain employed.
Mm-hmm. Are there particular degrees or areas of concentration that are trending?
There are, and I'm going to give you my top 5 because it can be quite broad. But to get to this answer, I want to talk a little bit how I'm answering it. And that's through job trends and hiring data. So we know that the pandemic has elevated new work sectors and almost eliminated others. And the pandemic has also accelerated technology solutions and automation. We're also going through a great reshuffling. You may have heard that, where a lot of people are seeking new employment, and also a great reskilling, where jobs are changing and current workforce needs really are forcing people to upskill or reskill. And people are adjusting to completely new career paths. And before I give you these, I also want to give a disclaimer that these are not one-size-fits-all solutions for any of the colleges and universities that might be listening to us this afternoon. It's really, you need to develop your own strategy around job trends, your current market, and match them with your institution's strengths, weaknesses, and really overall goals. So the first is data analysis and data science. So these fields are booming right now in business, information technology, and the health fields. Data sets are getting larger as we're spending more time online. There's more data to analyze. And people really need to understand how to mine data sets to develop strategy for investment, consumers, marketing. So key things like big data, data mining, utilizing machine learning, and business intelligence are all critical areas. And in health, fields like bioinformatics are showing big growth as well. The second area of career focus would be workplace diversity. In 2020, created a spotlight to show that the country was not taking diversity seriously enough. So companies both large and small were hiring diversity managers, directors, and coordinators, which was a job sector that was up by 90% since 2019 to help businesses develop ethical practices within their organizations. They're hiring learners with degrees in management and leadership, MBAs, and organizational development or organizational psychology with a focus on diversity to fill those positions. I have to also talk about nursing. The need for nurses is still expanding, a trend that we saw before the pandemic that continued throughout. And specifically, there's an increase in advanced practice nursing, especially nurse practitioners in the family, gerontology, and psychology, mental health areas. Public health is both in nursing and in non-nursing degree fields have shown a sharp upward tick this year. And finally, we also have telehealth, where certificates in telehealth, as the world gets increasingly digital, are also on the rise. On the business side, you have things like supply chain and logistics with worldwide disruptions and supply chains that are changing in 2020 and the continued disruptions in 21. So here, MBAs with concentrations in supply chain and logistics or master's specialty degrees are also on the rise. And finally, as we spend more time online in a digital environment, cybersecurity is another career path that's on the rise, both for those that are on the technical side of cybersecurity, so things like penetration testing, ethical hacking, network security, and also the management and leadership of cybersecurity departments. And so here we are seeing people being very sensitive to cybersecurity, both from at-home work, personal, as well as business-to-business applications. Think about all the cloud applications that we use, shopping from your phones. So it's all increasing more so than we've ever seen. And learners are looking for both bachelor's and master's programs in cybersecurity, as well as certificate programs for upskilling in both the business and IT sectors.
Very interesting. So Will, I'd love to tap into your sort of industry perspective on this. What jobs are in the highest demand at Amazon, and what types of positions do you see that are needing to be filled?
Yeah, thank you. What I'm going to say is going to, support what my colleagues have put forward. At first, at a very general level, at an industry level, according to LinkedIn and several other sources, jobs around cloud computing remain one of the most in-demand, hard-skilled jobs the last 5 years. And that supports both the data analytics things that have put forward and just around advanced computing. And they're not only in demand, but they're high paying. Specifically in 2020, tech jobs like this, such as software developer, network engineer, requiring specific credentials, appear in the top 10 highest paying jobs requiring specific certifications. As for Amazon and AWS, demand is around just that. It's around certified career paths like software developers, solution architects, sys administrators, everything in those job families, and they're all high demand, not just by Amazon or Amazon Web Services, but by public sector and commercial employers that are employing these technologies. And there is demand. A couple examples in Texas, in 2020, MZ Data identified about 348,000 unique jobs requesting either cloud computing, data analytics, or advanced computing skills. And then more than 13% of those jobs requested specific industry standards credentials, like what I represent, either from Amazon Web Services or Amazon itself. Another example is Atlanta, Georgia, where they're on the forefront of a booming tech sector. In Atlanta, the number of tech jobs have grown 46% since 2010. Think of the industry that's had to come in, and the adaptations that have had to happen in the education systems there to keep up. And again, MZ Data, there's over 125,000 cloud computing jobs that came on just in the last couple of months that are available in Georgia. In addition to these pathways, again, our data supports what's been put forth by my colleagues here. We're seeing an increased employer and public sector demand for unique and distinct skill identifiers outside of degrees in the form of certificates or micro-credentials. And they relate to new and emerging technologies, big data analytics, cybersecurity, quantum computing, machine learning are on that list. And only a select number of graduates, so now you kind of define the challenge, right? Which is only a select number of graduates or job seekers currently hold a credential that is recognizable by the employers needing to fill these positions. So creating a significant skills gap for local employers interested in hiring technical talent to fill open roles. And it's only getting more challenging.
Okay, well, more than one of you mentioned the pandemic in answering these questions, and so I'd love to dive into that. In the last spring, we saw a nationwide scramble to implement remote learning, perhaps evidence of a failure to embrace the most core competencies of online learning. But on the flip side, institutions like Maryville offered robust interactive online learning and did not falter amid the pandemic. So Dr. Lombardi, what do you recommend for other universities who are struggling with that move to online?
Well, it'll sound flippant, but go back in time 10 years and start online. It was a significant process for us starting 6-7 years ago, but we built it from the ground up and we did it the right way. We hired learning designers who were excellent at designing courses in online space and got them partnering with faculty. We spent an enormous amount of time really training our faculty. Over 93% have been trained in and have worked in the online space. And you got to build the right network that can support it and the right learning systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it takes a lot of effort and a lot of resource to build it. But once you have it, and when the pandemic hit, we were able to shift fairly seamlessly. We still had a few bumps in the road, but we were able to shift into that environment and serve our students very effectively. And so, and I had a number of friends of mine calling up and saying, hey, what can you do for us? And there was some stopgap measures that universities could take in order to deal with that crisis. But in order to build a robust and an amazing content rich online experience that simply isn't somebody sitting in front of a camera and lecturing, which frankly is not online, trust me, you've got to invest and you've got to build the right model from the ground up. And I think universities now have realized that. What's amazing about the pandemic is the debate on some campuses about online is now dead and gone. Everybody realizes not only its effectiveness, but its power as a tool. It's not the only tool in learning, but it's a very effective and amazing tool. Now they've got to make the commitment to do it and do it the right way. And frankly, some universities are, and some universities have decided not to. They don't want to make that commitment, and frankly, they're going to suffer greatly in the years ahead because of that decision.
Yeah, well, looking forward, in the years ahead. How do you see learning design and technology evolving, and what the experience look like for the student?
Well, I'm sure Will and the rest of the panelists would say it's evolving on a daily basis, and we're learning so much about how to. We've got a team of some 16 learning designers that do incredible work, and they're constantly learning new skills, evolving, developing the technology and the ways we can use the technology. Eventually for me is maybe 18 months to 3 years. I think the online learning environment will be taking place in the Metaverse. I think that the internet will be replaced by a Metaverse. There are several companies working on this now, sophisticated, I'm sure somewhere in between building rocket ships. They're doing it at Amazon, I would guess. But certainly Epic Games is doing it. There are a number of other entities. Zuckerberg just came out and talked about Facebook's investment in the Metaverse, meaning that students will be living and engaging as avatars with faculty and with others within this three-dimensional space. So I think that will probably be the future of online learning, and what it will do that some parts of online learning can't do right now is bring in a fully functional physical engagement laboratories and other types of physical engagement learning into that space. And that then when that universe, if you will, that metaverse is created and can effectively do that, then I think the sky's the limit when it comes to access and opportunity for learning to millions of people.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, since you're a former academic, does the word metaverse sort of strike fear into your heart? Or how can you help faculty and administrators adjust their approach to pedagogy to address these kinds of trends?
Yeah, thanks. No, it doesn't strike fear into my heart because you could see it coming. And if you look at this next generation of learners, just think about Gen Z. They're 100% comfortable operating in a fully online digital environment. And this really is a permanent part of education. And faculty and administrators are really going to need to evolve as well. Students are learning differently than perhaps how we've learned in the past. And so we need to learn to adapt to our learners. We need to go to them with how they want to learn and what they want from their educational experiences. So it's really also important to consider some collaborative approaches to education and community building around the learners. So creating educational experiences that allow students to learn in this kind of setting are things like flipped classrooms, project-based learning, cooperative learning, and gamification. Those are all methods that could fall under this pedagogical approach. And finding ways to meet that student's need for that anytime, anywhere, any size learning focus I mentioned before is really going to be key in higher ed's future. And this can mean incorporating multimedia and multiple approaches to knowledge gathering, more so than just that textbook. And if it is a textbook, it's engaging with it in a more three-dimensional way. Incorporating video, multimedia, and engaging with the text in a way that's meaningful beyond, flashcards, but, learning communities and that sort of thing. Another way is to create multiple pathways into degrees. Not everybody wants to commit to that long-term degree right off the bat. They may not be ready to, they may not be able to afford to, but starting with things like a short course or a certificate program, or even providing access to some non-credit learning portals, like, for example, using Duolingo in a language course. And finding different ways to both accept and assess prior learning. So perhaps a little bit closely related to something like a competency-based education model, or simply finding ways to assign credit or waive credit for assessed knowledge gained in things like MOOCs, on-the-job training, or even industry certifications.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Lombardi, what do you see as the benefits of offering these alternative pathways, non-traditional programs such as short courses or boot camps, certificates? What do you think about that?
Well, I think they're absolutely essential, and I'll use an analogy. The Olympics just finished. We have all these track and field athletes. They run marathons, they run high hurdles, they run sprints, they run all different level. What if we took all of them and we said, no, you're only going to one run race and it's going to be a marathon, okay? Obviously, we wouldn't be showcasing the skills of the sprinters, the hurdlers, and all these different. That's what we've been doing for 150, 200 years. Higher ed has been providing one way of doing it. Long 4-year, 5-year, 6-year degrees, some mandated professionally, others internally, and warehouse learning. You go to class, you take 3 or 4 classes a semester, etc. That's good for some people. That works for some people. Short courses, experiential learning. Andrea mentioned about credit for life experience. There are multiple ways of taking your knowledge, your experience, your personalized learning style, and accessing content in a variety of forms. And it shouldn't be in just one form. It should be in multiple forms, because we never know the talents of the people that we have and the people that come to us unless we give them the opportunity to showcase them in the best way that they can. All right, so what we've done historically is done it one way. It's closed out a lot of people. There are tremendous DEI issues with that, access and opportunity, etc. So, for example, if someone can learn physics by watching videos of how people teach physics or how they do projects in physics, why not have them learn that way? So I think short courses, micro-credentialing, certificates, badges, and on, all of them are part of the rich tapestry of an educational, lifelong learning experience, and they should be. And so universities and partnering with companies like Amazon and Pearson and others, and we should be trying to deliver to the widest possible group of people and to capture all those learning styles. We shouldn't be focusing just on one.
Mm-hmm. Andrea, do you see a parallel with consumer buying behavior as it relates to shorter educational offerings versus full degree programs? And what should universities be thinking about with that parallel?
Sure. First, I want to tell you a little bit about one thing that we found in Pearson's online marketplace survey. This was a survey that was conducted in 2020. But we found an environment where 84% of students say that they struggle with choosing a program. So they need the most help in like selecting educational opportunities and are really overwhelmed by the array of current selections and formats, program prereqs, alignment to their career path. And so looking at consumer behavior is really the best place for educational providers to start. When you see the student as the consumer, it's not to depersonalize them. It's to meet them with an educational product that they want. And students exhibit classic buying behaviors in their educational choice. So in a market that's flooded with choices, choosing a full degree program is a big purchase. There's a lot of fear wrapped up around big purchases. Think about how much thought you might put into buying a house or a car. And so creating pathways to degrees through shorter form credentials really reduces the stress of a purchase. Alternative credentials are more low stakes. They're almost free, not a free, but a trial period. Although some MOOCs, they are free and they could be sort of that free trial. So this also will help increase the diversity of learners and really help close this opportunity gap. So new traditional learners who tend to be older, more diverse, navigating career and family at the same time, and maybe really years away from being in college originally, entering a full degree program is a pretty high stakes thing to undertake. And also for learners impacted by income level, the short form credential offers an affordable pathway into a full degree program. And partnered with alternative funding or other low-cost formats, suddenly a higher education experience really is within reach. And these shorter format programs can also help learners prove that they can operate on within higher education, help to build their confidence and knowing that they'll succeed, And unlike things like, I'm sure you've seen all of the press about perhaps bias that are in traditional testing, that if you have a student take a short course to begin with and try them out and they're successful, it might be a better marker to how they'll do in a full-length degree program than, you know, the traditional, you know, test score.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering how employers weigh the different, you know, how they value the different types of credentials that are out there. So Will, what's your take on whether education is more important or experience in the field when you're looking at resumes, or do you see that dynamic shifting?
But I think it's certainly dynamic. While there are constants around education, the value of degree, defining a candidate's quality, the challenge we find that we're trying to help recruiters sort out is to match specific and evolving skills and experiences and recognizable ways that lend themselves towards automated mediums, job boards, skills exchange, and things like that. And that linkage into in-demand jobs requirement, and those jobs are virtually changing yearly because the changes in the workplace created by new and emerging technologies. So I don't think it's an either or, at least that's the data we see, but it's this messy space in between to account for, you know, the combination of what chief HR officers say they need, which is a highly qualified candidate that's defined by having a combination of recognizable credentials, both at the degree and the skills level, defining what a person can do, and the experiences. I think it was brought up here, you know, either it's gamification, but the experience of what they've done. And then, you know, because plainly, just look at the data sets and the interviews, candidates with recognizable credentials matched to those jobs and that are relevant and up to date, you know, that can either express themselves through badges, micros, certifications, that are doing it with partners that have a reputation of keeping up with the maturity of how these technologies are affecting the workplace, unequivocally have advantage. These candidates have advantage over those who don't. So, you know, so I kind of let that answer the question. And then employers see these candidates that come in with these specific credentials, you know, then you can use your talent development money more efficiently. Like, you know how to develop, you know, you can bring someone in at the appropriate level so you don't have, you know, first year frustration, things like that. And, you know, employers also see these candidates better able to serve their customers and their business, and then account for adaptations, again, for the combination of technologies and services that these situations are creating skills demands that don't exist in their current job positions. So, you know, and again, that's the recruiters talking. So that's the first part on the credentialing itself and the importance of it in today's job market. But the other hand of it is that just makes a qualified candidate. A highly qualified candidate has degrees of experience. And it's just that, hands-on experience, and you can get it either through simulations, gamification, internships, externships, apprenticeships, that give the employer the ability to assess. And again, it goes back to place at the appropriate level and provide, you know, very progressive development. So it's dynamic for the learner, it's dynamic for the job seeker, the educator that's trying to solve that problem, and the recruiter who's trying to you know, increase you know, adoptions of new technologies and apply it to how they're trying to be more productive around customer needs.
So Andrea, I know Pearson recently did an employer survey, and I'm wondering how that sort of vibes with what Will's been saying and some of the trends that you found there.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I mean, employers' views on alternative credentials are also shifting, just like we saw with learners' attitudes. So non-degree credentials are more accepted. And overall, though, the need for education of all types is increasing. So in our 2021 employer survey, we saw an overall increased preference for additional education at the bachelor's, master's, and certification or certificate level. However, one of the things we also found was that the credential really must match the business application, just what Will was saying. 79% of employers believe that a credential is only valuable when there's an alignment with the curriculum with applied real world work. One other thing that our survey revealed is that there was an 11% increase between 2019 and early 2020 of employers hiring non-degree credential holders. Still, whatever that credential, they also put in that qualifier that that credential had to be relevant and directed towards real world work. And what's driving this is the skills gap. So most jobs are going to see an overall increase in the number of skills required, and upskilling that's driven by business need, and reskilling driven by the pandemic job sector loss is really creating a space for shorter term credentials. And the skills gap is expected to grow, and learners and employers are going to need an appropriate and agile learning methods to really address them. So alternative credential programs can really precisely target immediate workforce need. They're less expensive and they're often taught on demand. And again, they tie into that low commitment, low stakes side of education that new learners or returning learners find very appealing.
All right. And I think I'll just ask one last question before we move on to the Q&A. And this actually happens to a little bit coincide with a question we've already had come in. So Will, what are the top 3 or 4 sort of hard skills you need graduates to come or to have coming to work at Amazon? And also, what are some soft skills you feel are important to develop? Oh, I think you're muted, Will.
There we go. Is that better?
There.
After a year, you'd figure we'd figure this out. So I think that's an important question, right? The World Economic Forum is predicting by 2022, over half of the employees in their current roles will require significant reskilling or upskilling, right? And that's just a year away. So it's important to know what's needed in that question, but with the limited time students have, learners have, it's equally important to know what's not needed. So the tech skills that I've described earlier, and then the skills around business, sales, and logistics are very important. And certainly we would require them just as any employer would require them for certain jobs. But the top skills we value most are actually a combination of, in your question, what you call soft skills and business skills. It's what we call essential skills. And they're around what, Amazon calls their leadership principles. So the skills around empathy and emotional intelligence of how you apply technologies and services, allow us to live up to our leadership principle around being customer obsessed. Skills to work in a team and be collaborative are essential around our principles to drive results and have a bias for action in ambiguous and challenging situations. But most of all, the skill of knowing how to learn, continually in multiple mediums so that we can learn and be curious alongside and behalf of our customers, and so that we can think big about opportunities and learn fast from our failures. Those are the skills that we value the most.
All right. So first, thank you for all of the panelists in sharing your perspectives on the future of higher education and how we can work together to solve the issues we're facing today and in the future. And so we'll move on to some audience questions. First, this is a question for Dr. Lombardi. Alternative credentialing is a big step forward, but at the end of the day, it's the credential that employers recognize in hiring that matters most. If employers keep mandating the 4-year degree, then the costs and debt crisis will continue. Do the panelists support retention of the 4-year degree for some careers? And also, since the business model of higher ed benefits greatly from lots of students pursuing 4-year degrees, is Dr. Lombardi concerned about how alternative credentialing might impact his and other colleges' enrollments? Lots to unpack there.
Well, I'm not concerned about how it'll impact our enrollment, and I think other universities should not be as well. Look, I think the most important thing here is one size doesn't fit all, right? So you're going to have professions, nursing, physical therapy, etc. They're going to require 4, 5, 6-year degrees in order to practice. So you've got professions requiring longer degrees. You've got other professions requiring different length degrees, and then you've got, hopefully, the explosion of the development of all these different micro and other credentialing. The idea here is that there are millions of people, and as Will and Andrea illustrated, really hundreds of millions of people who need an education and continuous job skill training over their entire career as they move around and through and between these careers, businesses, and organizations. So the reality is that we're entering a golden era of education. And what higher ed needs to do is needs to partner with companies, like we talked about, and it has to break out of the mold of simply there's a 4-year degree or a 5 or a 6-year degree, and say we can offer a variety of different educational experiences and opportunities. Some of them may be 2 months, some of them may be 2 years, some of them may be 4, 5, 6 years. We can offer all of them, or at least the ones that fit with our skill set and identity, and provide continuous education. Okay, so think of it this way. If you're looking at, if you think of the business model as I get an 18-year-old, they go through 4 years, they graduate, and then I ask them for money every year as an alum, that's one business model. But the real business model here is bringing in students into an active learning ecosystem with all these offerings, like at Maryville University, and they are being educated at Maryville throughout their whole career. Okay, because when they do job skilling in cybersecurity, they come to us because we happen to be partnering with several companies, including theirs, on cybersecurity workforce training. Or they come to us and they need to go back and go into data analytics or go into a field that hasn't been invented yet. Their first instinct is to come to us, and we'll work with them and partner. So it's not the length of the degree that's the problem or the issue about the business model. It's our concept of lifelong learning. Embrace the concept of lifelong learning, and whether it's a 4-year degree or they do 20 5-hour certificates, doesn't make a difference.
And a follow-up question on that. One of our audience members brings up the point that there are certain barriers like financing, regulation, et cetera, to universities offering these non-traditional programs. Dr. Lombardi, how do university leaders overcome those barriers?
With great dexterity and deftness. You're talking about accrediting bodies, you're talking about other entities, and by the way, they're further behind on these things, most of them are, than universities, and that's kind of a scary thought. So what we really need to do is partner and work with employers, and Will, I think, and Andrea said it very, very well. Here's what employers want, here's where careers are available, here's what new and emerging careers are available, and basically partner with them in how to deliver these things in a variety of different formats and ways. We started out in workforce training with several programs, non-degree seeking, simply workforce training and workforce empowerment. If the initial work is not towards a degree, you don't have to get anybody's approval to do it at all. And then once we've worked through that, then we can begin to take a look and see, well, does some of that workforce training, can an employee take it and use it towards a Maryville degree or another degree? So there's a whole bunch of ways to do this where you're not hamstrung, particularly by some gatekeeping bodies that, let's say, are operating a little more in the 20th century than they are in the 21st.
Here's a question for Will. Speaking of industry partnerships, what educational programs does AWS offer to higher education institutions?
Yeah, so, first of all, we'd seek a partnership around a program called AWS Academy, which is kind of an out-of-the-box, no-cost or low-cost way to provide credentialing through existing programs that would be at that school. We also have AWS Educate, which is kind of a self-paced. We find kind of applying that at a foundational or on-ramping level. But then we can also bring in, where schools are, where institutions are, going the route of boot camp, we have AWS Restart, which is going to be focused on the veterans or unemployed population. So kind of a myriad of programs that are trying to help institutions solve some of their students' hardest problems. But then we'd also bring in services where we can bend some of those products to either enhance existing programs or help institutions start industry standard, either associate degree, bachelor degree, or with something we just did with Howard, which was a master's degree.
And I'm going to try to squeeze in one last question for Andrea. What soft skills have been the most relevant for faculty or staff to adjust and improve during the pandemic?
Well, flexibility and being able to deal well with ambiguity. There's a lot of change right now, and higher ed was already going through a disruptive period before COVID hit. And as Dr. Lombardi said earlier, we just, the pandemic fast forwarded where we were. And so being able to be flexible, for educators, I think it's also important to continue to get education yourself. Learn about new teaching methods, learn how to use gamification in your classroom. Think flexibly and differently from how you thought of higher ed in the past. Because it's really going to be that disruption that drives innovation. And there's some really exciting things that can come of that. And that doesn't mean that 4-year degree is going away at all. It's just changing, and you have to be able to move with that change. So think flexibly too about how your degrees are sort of packaged. Instead of buying it all in one chunk, it could be packaged slightly differently. So you could take your same educational product and market it to a number of different audiences. And so therefore it becomes a very, it's cost effective for the university to do that. But it's also exciting because as a faculty member, you get to now teach to a wider and broader type of student. You may have students that are in their 50s in your classroom, and you may have those that are just coming from high school. So it's a pretty exciting time, but you need to have that flexibility and ability to function under a time of great change.
All right, so unfortunately we are out of time. We did record the session and it will be available online. We also will be following up with any unanswered questions in the chat offline. And if anyone has other questions, our contact info is up on the screen. Thank you so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.